decade, 9 years, something like that. So, actually, oh, maybe you did. It's the heat.
Alright. Alright.
Okay, so let me reset up the monitor.
I think I'll sit further in the back.
Ooh.
Work.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. So, been SLUG member forever. I've been a programmer for almost as long. And a issue that I run into personally that I wanted to do a quick presentation on. Yes, Dylan?
You have been a programmer since at least your first SLUG meeting, because your first thing you told me is that you had written a thing using this new thing called Ajax, and you had written a wiki that you never had to refresh.
I remember doing that.
And it wasn't even called HTML. It wasn't even called Ajax at the time. You said I'm using the XML HTTP request object that IE introduced, and Firefox has supported since blah. So don't understate.
Yeah, I've been doing it a long time. Well, I guess some of my open source experiences, I used to help out with the Gentoo Linux installer project back in high school. Random bug fixes for projects that I've contributed to. Random stuff pushed up on GitHub, tons of code for work, and this is kind of to introduce what I've done with LibreOffice. So I have a lot of programming experience, but one thing that's always been a challenge for me is how to actually contribute to an open source project, especially an established one. So it's really easy, especially nowadays, it's far easier to get started on your own code base, i.e. GitHub. See if I can get signed in. GitHub fail.
So it doesn't want to lean forward.
Oh,
There we go.
I'm trying to get mine down where
So
you're
it's,
Can't seem
I have many GitHub repositories of random things I've worked on. Nothing's really that big or keeps a lasting interest. So a challenge that I've had is, okay, so you can contribute random things for your own stuff, but how do you join a major open source community? And I set out to do this in the little bit of time I had in between work projects with LibreOffice. For anybody who doesn't know, LibreOffice is the successor to OpenOffice after Oracle bought Sun and let OpenOffice die. So at the time, let me see if, I'm sure they still have that site up.
Oh, yeah, that's still there. The Center over Apache Foundation.
Okay, so Oracle bought Sun.
They're not interested.
Oracle decided that they didn't really care about OpenOffice and, for lack of a better word, pissed off the community. Community forked to LibreOffice and said, we're going to do our own thing. And then Oracle said, well, now we don't have anybody that's giving us free code. We don't care about this anyway. Here you go, Apache. And IBM kind of went with the Apache move as well. So IBM is the main backer of the Apache OpenOffice project. And LibreOffice is for most Linux distros, and it's growing for Windows as well, as the main free Office suite. So this is a huge code base. And I wanted to, well, let me go back to why you would want to contribute to something like LibreOffice.
Why would you want to contribute to something like LibreOffice?
It all depends on what kind of project you're interested in. So I guess the best analogy I could come up with for picking an open source project is similar to how you picked a college. So you can have small local art universities that have kind of a hometown feel that everybody knows everybody else, and that's what your typical GitHub project will be. There's only a couple of handful of developers, and they're grateful for whatever help that you can get. Some of the bigger projects, LibreOffice, KDE, and Mozilla are probably the best examples of them, are huge. They're large code bases with hundreds or thousands of contributors. that tend to have a lot more structure because of the amount of work that they're doing at a given period of time.
Except for backing up with KDE.
Or
They
they
almost
have,
lost their entire code base.
really?
Oh, there was database corruption in their main upstream
Oh, was
server.
that the GitHub,
And
I'm sorry,
everyone
that
was
Git
star
replication
syncing.
problem?
Yeah. Everyone was just thinking,
Really?
and a week later, and everything was gone.
And so all those secondaries were just clones, so.
Didn't they have like a refresh server that wasn't updating, that was the only way that they saved everything?
Yeah, they got lucky.
Well, that's one of the
In your
question.
metaphor,
Huh?
what if you wanna what if you wanna help out with an open source project that's a party school?
If you want to
KDE
help
would
out-
be that. KDE is that one.
Or a big football school.
football school.
Well, so what's the
Sports
next
school,
one
whatever
for
school.
bunch of dumb people doing nothing?
Hatching.
Kind of Mozilla, actually. I
I'm
was
willing to
gonna-
break bones to do nothing.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about Mozilla, but they're actually aiming at that kind of analogy for some of their newer stuff. But now the nice thing about the larger projects, when you want to get involved, is they tend to have lots of things like documentation and this is how to help out and all that fun jazz, and this is how to build the program if you're into coding. Smaller projects, you're mainly on your own. Like one of the other projects that I was interested in helping out on, but didn't really work out so great, was the GIMP. It's the GNU image manipulation program and widely used. But it turns out it's incredibly difficult to build and doesn't really work on Ubuntu except once it's packaged. Whereas on the LibreOffice front, it ends up being where is it? I'm not on, I couldn't get the Linux partition to work, so I'm on my Windows box. It ends up being a quick checkout from Git and build, wait 25 hours or so, and you have LibreOffice ready for development.
Is it literally 25 hours?
It's thereabouts. Depends how fast your computer is. But it's one checkout, which ends up making life a lot easier.
Which drop out the name from? Go.
Well, and because of my Gen 2 background, I remember back when this was probably 5 or 6 years ago, when you went to build OpenOffice on Gen 2 back in the day, 24 hours was an amazing build time. It was usually several days at best. Most people download the binaries instead. So they've gotten better. They've cleaned up a lot of their code. But okay, so that's from a build perspective. But we're not really there yet. The bigger question that I didn't ask or answer is, what do you want to do? I'm a coding guy, so that's where this my perspective comes. But for a lot of people, they may not program, but they still want to be involved. So kind of the easy other ways to get involved, especially with a large project, is bug checking, bug replication through the bug tracker, and I'll show that off some. Documentation writing. Honestly, most programmers hate to write documentation, so any help with that is frequently very welcome. And just community involvement. I don't know if anybody, well, I'm sure most of the programmers use Stack Overflow, but forums or IRC or answering questions on Stack Overflow style sites is also a way to help out a project and build cred in the community. And depending on the project, like I have some libraries that I use in the Java world, the only community involvement is Stack Overflow now. That's the new forum, evidently, from what I've seen. So I kind of wanted to, so that's the high level. Any questions so far? I was going to kind of walk through what it took to get started on the LibreOffice front. One other thing, if you're a college student, probably the easiest way to ever get started in an open source project and get paid for it is Google Summer of Code. They take applications every year, fund several $1 million worth of student time, and You get dedicated mentors and help and documentation to get you started. But onto the LibreOffice side. So from their perspective, and this is kind of how I got involved. They have a nice, huge get involved page that says these are the basic tasks you can do. From there, what they recommend is find an easy hack. So the LibreOffice code base is known for being huge. It's several million lines of code, all C++, Java, Python, and some other things. A little bit of C.
OpenOffice Basic.
Huh?
OpenOffice Basic.
I don't know if there's any actual basic
Templates.
code in there, but there's the interpreter. So it's huge and it's very hard to get started until you've got your feet wet. So what they do in their bug tracker is, when people report issues, sometimes they're so simple that a newbie could pick them up without much trouble. And I call
Files
it
misspelled. Files misspelled.
Actually, some of them are kind of like that. The one I did to get my feet wet, and I haven't been able to contribute anything after I did that, was to add a version command line prompt. So when you run OpenOffice-version, it would say this is the version number and the source revision that built this code. So it's an easy hack, and it's enough to get you started on the code base. So I'm going to just jump into the Bugzilla and see how huge it is. So what you end up having is a bunch of bugs. They're identified issues that somebody's actually gone through and said, this is an easy thing to do. Which if you're looking to contribute to an open source project, that ends up being useful. Because you know it's going to be simple, for the most part. My second one was, I'll get into that, wasn't so simple. But you also have a name of somebody to get hold of. That's actually been the most enjoyable part of it, is that typically a large open source community, it's more the community than about the code. Because keeping a large group of unpaid people motivated is a very difficult thing to do. So the friendships, the discussions, the ginormous IRC channel with tons of people in it help when you want to help out. So typically, you pick an easy hack, you go into the IRC channel, and you'd say, I'm looking to do this. What do you think? Is this something reasonable, or is something not a great idea? And they're there to help you out. Just like the SLUG channel. We have a SLUG channel if anybody hasn't been in the IRC channel. On a side note. Dylan has all the connection information if you'd like to find out after the meeting.
Of course, the SLUG channel is kind of also for crypto anarchists that don't want their stuff going in plain text, but yeah. Freenode is another example of getting a channel listing and finding a project that way.
Yes.
Although, I shouldn't recommend that because has anyone that's used Freenode ever found a channel where when you have a problem you don't know more about the code base than the people in the channel? Because that's never been the case for me. Is LibreOffice on Freenode?
Yeah, that's their main.
So when you ask a question, there's someone in the channel that actually knows some part of the code.
Usually, that guy is extremely knowledgeable. His name's Michael Meeks.
Mm-hmm.
He's the lead developer for LibreOffice.
I think that's the thing is they need to clarify whether or not the people in the channel are actually developers on it or just sort of like hangers on. Your small example with GIMP reminds me of that because the glib channel, which is related to GIMP, is about the same thing. Like, I found a weird buffer overflow in this code. Oh, that's cool.
Well, the fun thing I found about when I was trying to contribute to the GIMP was, you go into the IRC channel and say, I want to help out. What can I do? And they'll say, here's the script. Run this to build the code to help out. Script don't work. So essentially, they don't follow modern development practice of having something like a build server to say, does our code even work? You get to find that out the hard way.
So is that something we can fix to help out with the project?
If you have the money and hosting ability to run a build server for somebody and disk space.
Well,
Because I run a build server at work, one thing I discovered very quickly, a build server likes lots of disk space. And that's a little bit of an understatement. Like I know the average, like especially with the LibreOffice builds, the average build for that's over 300 megs. So if you build once per commit, you're at tens of gigs a day easily. But back to going through the easy hack process. Once you've selected what you'd like to work on, you've asked about in the IRC channel, the next thing is to actually build the code. Unfortunately, because the projector doesn't work, I'm going to have to do this on one of my remotes. Wait, can I get it off of SSH?
Yeah.
Wait, the projector doesn't work? What?
No, I couldn't get it to work on the whatchamacallit, the Linux partition.
Oh, I had the same problem. Are you using NVIDIA graphics?
Yes.
What is your guys' problem? I
So-
work beautifully.
So are you trying to bring up the flame war now, Joel?
No, I'm just saying this is. I actually argued both sides of it quite effectively.
I know, I was joking.
You either use the
Let me
open
ask
source.
someone a naive question, but what programming languages were all written in?
LibreOffice is written in a variety of languages.
Okay.
The vast majority is C++.
Did I mention to you on Saturday?
There's C, there's Python,
Where I
there's
control
Java,
here and redo, log
shell
back
script.
in.
Mm-hmm.
And the-
shell script,
going
yes,
back to the old-
macro language,
Perl?
but that's getting better. They're on a standard build system now called GMake, which if anybody does anything with build systems, GMake's actually considered to be quite bad, but it's better than the hand-built
GMake?
system. Yeah, they're using GMake.
Never heard of that one. I've heard of CMake.
GMake is the GNU Make system pre-Auto Tools.
Oh, so they went back in time.
No, they went forward in time because what they were on before, they were on a hand-rolled make files from like 17 years ago.
And that's why they had so much problems porting to AMD 64 back in the day.
Well, no,
Pardon.
they also just have a bad code base too.
I think it's just porting in general that there are problems with.
Does LibreOffice compile in ARM yet, I wonder?
Maybe.
I think you can run Libre on 5.
Oh, okay.
Jen soon find out.
Can you talk some more about GMake?
GMake, what he's saying is that GMake is just the GNU Make program and a system of pre-make files that are building with it. It's basically when you run Make, that is GMake, but the Make file itself is written by Auto Tools, which is what most normal projects use, but LibreOffice is not using that currently.
What's Make?
If you don't know what Make is, on the Linux machine, type man Make. It's outside of the topic of this presentation, I would think.
Make is a shell program that goes through and compiles everything for you.
There you go.
C compiler?
Any compiler.
No, it's-
If it doesn't know about the compile, all it knows is it runs shell commands to make files. That's all it knows.
Okay.
You tell it, I make a file by running this command, and update it if these files change.
Okay, so let me go grab the code base, and I'll pretend to start doing the compile. We don't have the time to go through the amount of time that it's going to take to actually build LibreOffice.
Lock the doors. 25-hour meeting. Go.
I'm hungry.
This turned into a hackathon.
A compile-a-thon.
But the thing I found out was I think this is the right command because I don't remember. It's been a while. If you're running Ubuntu, which I am, when you build, especially a C++ style program, so when you want to get started, let's say you want to start on LibreOffice development, you need all the libraries that it uses in order to start building your code, which ends up being something like 300 packages for all the libraries. The nice thing when running on Ubuntu is there's this nice handy command called apt-get build-dep LibreOffice. Run that, hit yes, and it will magically download and install everything. So the next step of actually starting the build becomes a one-liner. It ends up being very simple. Depending on what you're comfortable in, LibreOffice is C++. If you're in the Java world, there'd be something, a project that's based on Maven or Ivy will typically also do this type of work for you, which for a new contributor is very nice. You don't have to fight with different libraries and set up your environment just right in order to add a line of code.
From the outside, I've always assumed that large components of OpenOffice are written in Java because I believe that it usually pulls that in.
Only one thing is written in Java in LibreOffice.
Okay.
And in OpenOffice. It was the wizards. So anytime you used a wizard, it would execute the Java JVM.
So, but the UI always looks very, very Java-like, it looked very swing-y. I guess that was just
Well,
the user interface.
because it's an Office suite. One of the things a typical Office suite does is write its own UI toolkit.
Okay.
So that was their own UI toolkit wrapper thing around the different environments.
So they weren't using like GTK directly or WX widgets. They had their own abstraction layer over
It
it.
depended on what version you were running.
Oh,
Because back in the day, there was OpenOffice. Oh, sorry.
Star Office.
Yeah, Star. Let's go really far back. Star Office, then OpenOffice, and then there was what's called GoOO, which is what all Linux distributions packaged. GoOO is a series of patches on top of OpenOffice that Sun wouldn't accept. One of those things was the use of Qt and GTK as rendering engines. Now, I know with LibreOffice, GoOO and OpenOffice have merged, and that was what produced LibreOffice. So all those patches for the multiple rendering engines are now part of the suite.
so you just get to choose which one you do at compile time?
It's typically a runtime.
Really? So yes,
Wait, is it runtime or compile time?
because it could do that. I can picture that. I mean, they're doing that with Wayland and GTK3. It switches between X11 and Wayland at runtime. So I imagine if you can do that all the way up the library chain.
Well, I know. Well, one of the challenges that OpenOffice has, or LibreOffice, whatever, has
Office.
is that it's Linux and Windows. So if I run it on Windows, I think I have it installed. It's only 3.6. I was working on 4.1, but whatchamacallit? It's actually rendering with GTK, if I remember correctly,
Yeah, on Windows.
on Windows.
That makes sense. GTK is pretty good on Windows.
What ends up happening, though, when you check out the code base, they provide their own copy of GTK.
For
So
Windows.
for when you're doing development,